Hi, I'm Betty Long, and welcome to the Lighting Your Way podcast. During Season 2, we are delving in deeper to the amazing lives and stories of nurses and other healthcare professionals from around the country. We will also be talking with a few of my nurse advocate colleagues at Guardian Nurses, and on occasion, even some real live patients. You'll get a behind-the-scenes peek at the healthcare system, as well as get advice on how to get the best care when you or a loved one is a patient. Nursing education has come a long way since Florence Nightingale trained the first nurses at the Nightingale Training School in London in 1860. While the uniforms may thankfully have gotten easier, curriculums certainly have not. Nurses graduated from the Nightingale School in 1 year. And in the 161 years that have passed since then, the training of nurses in the U.S. has grown to 2 years with associate degree programs, 3 years diploma programs, and now 4 years with baccalaureate programs. Interest in a nursing career remains strong even after the troubling images of the COVID-19 pandemic. And though there are more than 4 million nurses in the United States, the number of nursing faculty, the nurses who train new students, is dwindling. According to the American Association of Colleges of Nursing, in 2020, thousands of qualified applications were not accepted at schools of nursing, due primarily to a shortage of clinical sites, faculty, and resource constraints. Talk to 10 nurses about what is the best way to train a nurse, and you may get 10 different answers. Regardless, the truth in this country is that we are going to need more nurses, and they are going to need to be trained. Here with me to talk about nursing education is Jennifer Fry, PhD, RN. Dr. Fry is the founding director of the nursing program at Cabrini University in Radnor, Pennsylvania. She has more than 15 years of academic nursing education experience, as well as nursing leadership and administrative experience. She has served as the dean and director of the ARIA Health School of Nursing and has taught research, leadership, med-surg, and critical care courses to undergraduate and graduate nursing students at Desales University, Moravian College, and Widener University. Welcome, Dr. Jennifer Fry, to the Lighting Your Way podcast. Thank you for taking time to be with me today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, no, it's great. It's great to talk to you this day before Thanksgiving. Jen, we have been talking about a lot of topics this season 2 of the podcast. And one of the, I guess, not issues, but one of the items I've wanted to talk about has been nursing education. But before we start talking about that, which is your specialty, tell me about your path to nursing. How we all have a story about how we became a nurse. What is your story?
Absolutely. So, my mom is a nurse. She was an OB nurse. So I always thought that what she did was cool, but it was not for me. And my dad was an architect, and he would go to work in the morning dressed in his iron shirt and go to the office and come back, and he would still look pretty much the same and smell good. And my mom would go to work smelling good and came home a little less than, fresh. And I always thought, why would anybody do that? Why wouldn't he just be an architect? And then unfortunately, when I was 13, my father had his first heart attack, and I got to see firsthand why it is worth it to not look fresh when you get home at the end of your shift. We were in the emergency room with my dad, and he was obviously very nervous because he had just had a heart attack. And what I noticed immediately was that they didn't just take care of him in the emergency room, but they also were very focused on me and my mother, my brothers, in terms of taking care of the family. And I think that was a big aha moment to me, because I realized, oh, wow, okay, you're not just taking care of the immediate emergency. You're taking care of everything and everybody around you. And I really like that holistic approach. And it was at that point that I decided that I got it. I get it, Mom. I understand why you do what you do. And I started to volunteer at the hospital at the age of 13 as a candy striper. And yes, I wore the whole red and white stripe thingy. It was delightful. But not unlike my uniform later at Villanova, I have to say it was blue and white, almost like a candy striper revamp.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. So, and then I was a candy striper as soon as I was able to take the nursing assistant course. I took that. I was 16, and then I was a nursing assistant slash, intern all the way up until the time I went to nursing school at Villanova for my undergrad,
Wow.
and practiced, being, in the healthcare environment, certainly associated with my education, but also with, the opportunity that I had to be at the bedside as a nursing assistant. So I did that until I graduated, and that's really how I ended up in nursing.
Wow. And not in OB nursing. You still,
No,
mom?
no. I am I say that with love, but that is not for me. It scares me. I ironically went into cardiac care. I ended up ultimately being a critical care nurse with an open heart specialty, cardiothoracic care specialty. Yeah. So of course I went
That's great.
into from heart attack to cardiac nurse.
Right. And architect is still in your back of your head. So nursing education. So you were in critical care, and then what gave you the bug for nursing education?
All through, well, first of all, I really appreciated the mentorship that I received as, a candy striper, nursing assistant, nurse, student nurse, new nurse. I was fortunate to be in an environment, for the most part, that was, conducive to my learning and my growth, and people were willing to teach me if I asked questions. So I naturally gravitated as soon as I, even as a nursing assistant and certainly as a nurse, was always drawn to the education, showing the people that were our patient techs or our nursing assistants. Once I was a nurse, I would show them like the cool stuff and explain to them why. And then I certainly liked patient education. In cardiac intensive care, there's a lot of patient education. There's a lot of patient education everywhere. But I particularly enjoyed the variety that came with caring for, post-operative cardiac patients in terms of their lifestyle and explaining the procedures and just everything. And I really enjoyed that education aspect. And then I had an opportunity to go back for my master's, and I did so. And that is when I got into taking up students in the clinical environment as an adjunct professor at Desales University, where I was enrolled as a master's student. So I had an opportunity to kind of see what that was like. I still practiced in, the intensive care unit and the PACU, with the post-anesthesia care unit, recovery room after surgery. And I really just enjoyed that experience. So as I was finishing up my master's at Desales, I took my first full-time faculty appointment at Desales. And that was my very first, full-time faculty position. And I learned, as with most people in nursing education, trial by fire, learned a ton of stuff even the first year that I was there, and then it's just have compounded since then.
Yeah, and you've been at several facilities and healthcare institutions, and now you're the founding director at Cabrini for their nursing program. How long have you been there?
That's correct. I've been at Cabrini for 3 years now. And during that time, the first year, there was no students because Cabrini did not have a nursing program. So the reason that I was hired was to develop and implement, operationalize a nursing program. So that's what I did. I spent the first year of my employment there learning about the university and its mission, because that was certainly the foundation upon which the curriculum for the nursing was built, and tying together all of the things in the world and society, in our local communities, and certainly, our local healthcare networks and healthcare clinical partners in terms of what they need for nurses, or nursing students as they transition, nursing graduates as they transition out into, full-fledged nurses. Like, what does that transition to practice look like? What do we need to teach them? And certainly there's no shortage of information out there as to what our nurses need to know, certainly guided by the State Board of Nursing for Pennsylvania. That's who regulates nursing education programs. They're also the ones who regulate our nursing licenses in each and every state. Obviously, ours is Pennsylvania. So there's regulations that are to be followed very rigorously. And then, accreditation agencies, future accreditation agencies, looking at what their guidelines suggest. Our major nursing and nursing education organizations in our nation are the National League for Nursing and the American Association of Colleges of Nursing. So both of those have a lot of things to say about what should be in nursing education. So kind of marrying all that together.
Yeah, that sounds like a huge task. No wonder it takes so much time to get a program started. Wow.
It does, it does.
Yikes.
But there's a lot of guidelines, and you just have to, the AACN, it's called, they have an accrediting arm called the CCNE. Lots of acronyms. It's just like,
Yeah.
nursing education has just as many acronyms as nursing in general. But the Commission on Collegiate Nursing Education is the accrediting body, and they just put out new essentials that we, as a body, as an organization, we voted on them earlier this year, and now they are to be implemented across all baccalaureate programs in the U.S. So certainly those guidelines go into it. Our stakeholders, hospitals, health networks, community care centers. The curriculum at Cabrini is very, very focused, like I said, on our mission of social justice. So the
Right.
lens of our curriculum is health equity, access for vulnerable and underserved populations. And that's, in the spirit of Mother Cabrini, for whom the institution is named, Cabrini University. So
Right.
we really focus on public health and public health, and that through that health equity lens, and then certainly things that are near and dear to me, leadership, that nurses should have a voice, no matter what table they're at, no matter how big, how significant. Nurses belong everywhere, saying, speaking, advocating for patients, communities, both at the local and the global level. So leadership and that using your voice wherever you are, in whatever capacity, is threaded throughout our curriculum. That felt important to me, as well as psych and mental health, because as we know from what's happening in our nation currently in society, that's something that it needs to be in there. So it's the curriculum development was kind of fun for me, because it was putting together a whole lot of pieces of a puzzle in a very different way than it has been put together before, simply by nature of the fact it's a brand new program. And
Right.
having as much time in nursing education and exposure to students on many different levels and many, masters, like all across the baccalaureate, so masters to second degree students, adult students, traditional students, having all the input from them and the experiences with them, and then actually speaking with some of the recent graduates, as I developed the program, to ask, what is it that you got from your nursing program that you really liked? What is it that you didn't get from your nursing program you wish you would have, as you're transitioning into practice, in a hospital or a community setting, and taking their feedback and putting it into the curriculum as well. So it was really fun to blend all the formal, strict regulations and
Right.
the guidelines put out by national entities, and talk to our stakeholders in the community and our health network, talk to the students, talk to just the vulnerable and underserved populations, going out into the community and understanding their needs, and putting it all together in a nice package. And that's
Wow.
what I did essentially for the first year I was there,
Wow.
and at Cabrini. And then in 2020, fall of 2020, we accepted our very first cohort, and they are now in their second
Yay.
year. Yay! Yes. So
Yay.
that was great. Now we have 2 cohorts, and I'm real proud of both of them. So we have first level students and second level students, or what's traditionally referred to as freshmen and sophomores, and we're recruiting our 3rd class now. So
Wow.
it's a lot of fun, and it's an intentionally small program, so we know the students really well. We only have, in those 2 cohorts together, we have, less than 40 students. So
Okay.
we really do know them, and that's a Cabrini thing, and it's for sure a Cabrini nursing thing, to have those relationships to help foster their growth and development.
Where are most of the students from? Philly? Are they from Philadelphia?
We get a good range. I mean, we go, the tri-state area certainly is popular, but we have students from, upper state New York, New England, but most of them are generally from the Philadelphia region, and then certainly the tri-state.
So you've had a 15 plus year tenure in nursing ed, and even in that short of a time, you've talked about all the regulatory bodies that are involved in setting up programs. But I know that there have been significant changes in how nursing students are being trained. Certainly, since you and I have been trained. But can you speak to some of those changes, just more broadly?
Sure. So, I mean, nursing education, I'd say the biggest, even pre-COVID, the biggest change that has happened is the scope of practice of the nurse.
Okay.
When I graduated from nursing school, what I needed to know, and what we expect our graduates now to know, is tenfold. There's so much more responsibility at the bedside or, at your direct patient line, wherever you are, if you're functioning in the community or acute care, wherever you are. There's so much more responsibility. We're health navigators, we're care coordinators, we're patient advocates. Our scope of practice in terms of technical skill has expanded, and then the scope of practice as a human, as a nurse, has expanded as well, because that's what society demands. I mean, even people, like even as an ICU nurse, psych mental health, of course, comes into that. But now there's just such more of an awareness of the needs of that vulnerable population. And then there's, the awareness of the other vulnerable populations right now. Nothing has brought to light more than the last couple of years with COVID and our, systemic issues that are just foundationally bred into this country, and all the systems that are built within them, addressing that and the health inequality that happens as a result of that. And that's something that's not new by any spread, it's not new at all. However, it's something that we're paying attention to differently now, and nurses and public health and all healthcare practitioners now have that responsibility as well to, for the good of the public, for the good of the patients and communities, to be looking at that and addressing that. So the scope of practice of nurses now versus the scope of practice, even 10, 15 years ago is huge. Also, there's just so much more focus, there's a million things that we could talk about, Betty, to be honest with you, but I'll just choose a couple. The whole insurance and reimbursement and value-based care, that certainly comes in. Nurses have to think about that in terms of, not that they shouldn't be thinking about infection prevention and things like that, but there's this whole new level of patient experience and making sure that we are giving and delivering value-based care. And that used to be something that was at a higher level. The people, in the offices worried about, and now it's the bedside nurse that's worried about it. So there's just so many things that are involved in nursing care.
You're right about the scope of practice, I think, certainly. But so, do you think 4 years is enough? Sounds like 4 years for a BSN may not be enough time.
Is 4 years enough time? It depends on, what we're going to have the nurses do. So nursing has a breadth of opportunity in terms of where we practice. And as we know, we have the entry level that is desirable at this point, and given the recommendations of the stakeholders, national organizations, is BSN at the bedside. However, we still educate nurses in a diploma setting, and we still educate nurses in an associate degree or a community college setting. Though all three of those nurses, BSN, ADN, and diploma nurses, sit for the same nursing license. So they have the same scope of practice, but what a baccalaureate degree does is it gives a more breadth to the understanding of the social sciences of the, it's a nursing degree is a nursing degree, but when you add on the liberal arts or the baccalaureate level, you're adding on a wider paradigm. And that leads to what we have, been thinking for years, is that we need to start getting students that are graduating or graduates from baccalaureate programs into master's and doctoral programs, because we cannot address the shortages of nurses until we address what is going on in nursing education, because we can have 1 million people signed up to be in nursing school, but if we don't have the faculty to teach them, because there's a faculty shortage, then we cannot feed the pipeline that we so desperately need. And the pipeline is dwindling because of retirements. That has been something that has been coming for over a decade, and then layer on COVID and the mass exodus from nursing that is occurring. As a result of that, we need now more than ever to bolster it. So is 4 years enough? It depends what kind of practice they're going to do, but BSN at the bedside is the desirable goal as an entry-level general practitioner.
Okay, so I just want to go back. So there are two other ways to train nurses that you mentioned, the associate degree, right? And then there's also the diploma programs that are still in existence, although small. There's a few of them, right?
There's less of them.
Yes, most, as you say, most desired as a BSN, and particularly if you're pursuing employment at hospitals that are magnet certification, then they want BSNs. So
and so a lot of employers, and that's exactly it. The workforce is driving that. So will employers hire someone without a BSN? in some areas like Philadelphia, no, they won't.
Right.
They're less likely to hire you if you don't have your BSN. But then there's some rural areas that would be happy to have any nurse
Right.
and be able to utilize whichever type of, whichever training that they had or whatever kind of nursing education they had, they will utilize them to the full capacity, which is how
Right.
it should be. Regardless of where you're being educated, you have to land in a place that will utilize you to your full capacity and then help you grow and develop so you can, be part of the greater good for nursing.
Jen, as you see the nursing shortage, and of course, the education shortage as well, not having educators as well, to your point about retirement, do you see programs coming back that are maybe that hospitals are relaxing those requirements to have BSNs? Do you see anything like the LPNs kind of growing in notoriety?
That's a great question, and one that I don't know a whole lot about. I mean, my sense is, without having data in front of me to speak to, my sense is that we are utilizing nurses of any capacity at this point, but the scope of practice of an LPN or an LVN, which is a licensed practical or licensed vocational nurse, is different than a registered nurse. So they
Right.
can't function, even if they're functioning at a really high level within their scope of practice, they have limitations. There are things that LPNs can't do that RNs can do. So yeah, that's a very personal opinion. You could put 100 nurses or nurse educators in a room and ask them this question and, get it split across the board as to, is there a place for LPNs in this world? Some people will say, no, it should be BSN or above. We need to, with the standards of care that we have, with all what our stakeholders demand, we need to have BSN or above at the bedside. And then you'll have others that will see the value in, licensed practical nurses being functioning to their full scope of practice and being in the team with the registered nurses and all
Right.
working together for a collective goal. So it depends
Right.
on the philosophy of wherever LPNs are being hired, whatever part of the country, whatever environment, urban or rural, and the philosophical aspect of all of that is to, how do we utilize LPNs? Some people say no, some people say yes. And it really is dependent. I really feel like it's dependent on your situation and what your workforce availability is as to whether or not you'll entertain an LPN. I think there's value in them. It's just that we have to, my personal opinion is there's value in all nurses. We just have to be able to identify and tier what all of us do, what are our roles, what defines one from another, and how do we work together collectively to maximize on our skill sets so that we can, all do the things that we're good at and that we are trained for, and collectively do a good job taking care of our patients.
Right, because I think, to your point, and we'll talk a little bit about the nursing shortage all over, but if there are opportunities to mitigate some of that problem and the shortage, it seems like we should try to come up with creative solutions to do that. Let me ask you about the education perspective. You mentioned that there is, much like there is across the board, a nursing shortage, but also in education and academia, is that there, at least to my knowledge, and correct me if I'm wrong, that programs, when you found out when you were at Villanova and went to Desales, you have to get a master's in nursing, correct, to teach at a nursing program? Is that still the case?
Well, that's up for debate.
Good.
There's multiple avenues through which you could teach, and it depends again on the institution. There's a lot of talk right now of non-nursing faculty teaching within nursing programs and the value of that. So somebody that's a social worker, a psychologist, a public health expert.
Great.
Those are non-nursing faculty, but they could certainly richen and diversify the school of thought within a nursing program. So I'm in that camp that's cool.
Yep.
Many people are opposed to that. That's really a basic philosophical thing. And then in terms of do you need to be master's prepared or doctorally prepared to teach in academia? Again, well, I say academia, and when I say academia, I mean like a 4-year program or above. But certainly there are nursing programs that teach LPNs. There are nursing programs that are diploma in nature, and there's nursing programs that are associate degree programs. For schools like that, and some of the, academic schools, the 4-year baccalaureate or higher, they will take certain nurse educators with, particularly in the specialties that are desirable. The highly desirable specialties would be like psych mental health, peds, OB.
Okay.
Not that not every nurse can teach those specialty areas.
Okay.
They'll take them at the master's level, but what really comes into play is, especially in a baccalaureate or higher education unit, such as a college or university, are they tenurable? Are we able to keep them? Certainly somebody with a master's degree, usually they're not in a track where they can become tenurable unless they are in a doctoral program. But there's a lot of discussion about, okay, what about a DMP versus a PhD or even an EDD with a nursing degree, tacked onto it? What is the terminal degree in nursing? No one has a good answer for that. There's a lot of white papers out there and a lot of opinion as to whether or not a DMP is something that is tenurable within an institution of higher ed versus, a PhD, which is, of course, the research focus. Because in a nutshell, a PhD creates research, adds to the science of nursing, and a DMP focused on practice learns to utilize that research for the better practice outcomes. And that's a very rudimentary, in a nutshell, Jen definition of that. It's much deeper than that, but there's so many revolving conversations about what is tenurable, what is a DMP versus a PhD, what is a master's level, what if they're a certified nurse practitioner, what if they're a nurse anesthetist, what if they are an advanced practice nurse, does that count? Just because their master's prepared. So the idea is the push is to have everybody, even if you are a CRNP or you are a nurse anesthetist or a nurse midwife, that you should be moving towards your doctorate. Even if you're practicing or if you're an academic, you should be moving towards expanding your education, becoming a doctorate of practice, or getting a doctorate in practice, a DMP, so that you can better serve your patients. But where's their role in academia?
Right.
Certainly I think there's a huge role for them, but that's a whole other conversation. But I feel like not every institution their model supports that. So it really, again, goes back to philosophical roots of the leader of the program, of the institution itself, and, everything that's going on around us in terms of what we're being told from the nursing organizations and in terms of guidance and white papers surrounding that. So there's no easy answer to that.
Well, but it sounds like there's a lot of bureaucracy to get through before we can get a solution to a crisis that just continues to get worse thanks to COVID, right? And the retirement of mature bedside nurses, nurses who've been in nursing for 40 years or 30 years that want to leave and leaving a gaping hole in bedside, right? And we don't and yet we have people young people or folks coming into nursing programs or want to come into nursing programs, and the programs can't accommodate them because they don't have enough training staff to train them.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah,
So it's really a conundrum that seems to be really needing to be resolved if we're going to get through this crisis.
There's many things that need to be tucked away to get through this crisis. Yeah.
But I know. Well, let me just ask one question about COVID. I know that there's been a lot of discussion, obviously, but in terms of how COVID affected nursing education, I have heard from so many of my colleagues in direct care that the students who typically would come in on their unit to have practical experience and work with a preceptor didn't get to do that because obviously COVID limited their exposure to real patients. So they have seen some of the students come out now who seem to be not as prepared. One of my colleagues suggested that there used to be a handoff, like for a preceptor and say a first year, nursing student who's just passed her NCLEX and she's on the floor, that there's a timidness about them, that they're not quite what they used to be because of COVID, right? They didn't get to see patients in their senior year. So they're very tentative about taking a patient and running with it, right? They keep coming back to the preceptor as though they're still not quite confident. Like they've missed that senior year of having patients on their own in a setting that was, they had an instructor and they had nurses on the floor, and now they're the nurse on the floor. So have you heard from your colleagues in terms of their students? I know that your students haven't gotten to that point, but what are you hearing from your colleagues?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And you're right. I can only speak broadly about this because Cabrini, we have first and second year students only. So
Right.
those students are not yet in the clinical environment. They will be soon coming up. But I can only speak to what my colleagues have told me, what I've read, what my network of people has, kind of reported out to groups of nurses. So from a broad perspective, yeah, I mean, when COVID hit and nursing education kind of got sidelined for obvious reasons because the hospitals and health networks and other, clinical agencies in the community had to think safety first, and they
Right.
were unable to accommodate students. So
Yeah.
nursing education programs across the board pivoted to try to offer virtual clinicals. We use simulation quite a bit in nursing education, which is, if the facility, wherever you are, college, or whatever institution you're at, if you have the capacity to offer sim, not everybody has beautiful sim labs. I mean, we happen to have a gorgeous sim lab, but not everybody has the resources that we have at Cabrini or some of the larger institutions. And we did the best we could to try to prepare students in terms of their skills and tried to do things virtually and tried to offer clinical experiences that were hybrid. And then slowly but surely, once the hospitals were allowing limited numbers of students in limited areas to come back, the experience of the nursing student was truly, truly limited. And
Right.
I think of this just like I think about, being I look at the admissions packets for all the students that apply to Cabrini with our nursing admissions liaison. Of course, she helps me quite a bit. But when we look at them coming out of high school, their junior and senior year, they are not prepared for college in some ways through no fault of their own. I mean, the kids 2 years ago couldn't even take their SATs because there was not an SAT testing site available because of COVID. This year, people are slowly they're starting to come back and do it. But these college freshmen that are coming in, they're really struggling to transition into college because they've had very limited opportunity and exposure to life and, situations. They don't know how to react to real life. They don't know
Right.
how to do anything other than being in a virtual environment for the last year and a half plus. So if you kind of, translate that to these nursing students that were in their junior and senior year when COVID hit, they did not have the same opportunities. We did the best we could as a group as nursing education, and we did the best we could. The health networks did the best they could and other community centers to allow students to come in, but it was this giant balance, just like everything else COVID, to make sure that we were maintaining safety, but also thinking futuristically that, we need to have students need to be able to come in and practice, but it doesn't look anything like it did before. And what are we preparing people for now? What we prepare nurses for now, post-COVID, is different than what we prepared them for pre-COVID in terms of practice. So does that happen? Absolutely. I'm sure that the new nurses are terrified to be on their own in the same way that, nursing graduates a couple of years ago were, because they just simply haven't had the opportunity to be exposed to situations like that outside of a virtual or simulated environment, which again is an amazing opportunity. But the whole live element is missing from that, and it makes sense to me. It's not okay, but it makes sense to me that nursing students, no matter where they're from, what school, where they are in the country, I mean, certainly they were affected by this, and that's the considerations of the healthcare networks are they're thinking about that too. My colleagues in health networks, they are saying, we have to revamp our orientation. What used to take us, X amount of weeks, we added on so many more. We added on supplemental education for our new grads because they just don't know. So everybody's kind of bolstering what it is that we do to help them transition.
Yeah, I know that last year during COVID, we asked several chief nursing officers how they were addressing the nature of the graduate nurses that they were hiring, right? Because they also had a year of no interaction with real patients. And many of them had creative ideas like nurse residency program to kind of shelter them until they were ready, right? But I think going back to high school is interesting to hear that from you, is that the juniors and seniors now in high school are going to go to college next year, and they will not come to college with the same set of skills that 5 years ago somebody would have
Right.
Interesting.
Well, the
Okay.
last two haven't. My first two cohorts, I mean, they're fantastic, but even coming in fall of 2020, that, their whole life shut down
Right.
March of 2020. And here they are
Right.
coming into college in August. Like, that's an
Right.
issue. And then
Right.
last year, certainly those students, the ones that are in class now as first years, and I'm not just talking about nursing students, I'm talking about students in general.
Right.
They were sat in a virtual classroom for a year and a half. Like, there's not that everybody didn't do the best we could, because I wouldn't have wanted to be a teacher during COVID. My goodness, what a challenging role. But,
Right.
Everybody did the best they could, but you can't replicate the real one-on-one realistic experiences from
Correct.
human contact. And
Correct.
that really, it's a ripple effect from, coming into college to, you can also take it down to, not to get too deep and philosophical, but look at our poor little kindergartners. Look at infants and babies now. They don't know anything other than to wear a mask. We have to worry about stranger danger because everybody stays away from everybody by 6
Right.
feet,
Right.
That's the
Right.
new normal for everybody. So it's just, it makes sense that our nurses transitioning are struggling, because everybody's struggling to transition into whatever phase is next for them, including, grown adults like myself. So
Right. Right.
it's kind of a phenomenon across the board.
Yeah, and I think it's up to obviously either employers or schools like yours to address that in different ways and continue. One of the things I heard you say, and I want to speak to this before we end up, is the sim lab. So way back when we were in nursing school, we had what we called the skills lab, where you'd be observed and graded, on things like starting an IV or inserting an NG tube. And I know that I briefly saw the Cabrini Sim Lab, also simulation lab. And so tell me a little bit about how the Sim Lab works and how, what kind of skills are being assessed or taught there now.
Sure. So, well, when you talk about simulation can range anywhere from a really low fidelity type thing to a high fidelity type thing. And what I mean by that is a simple skill where, you use, you do health assessment on one another, or use simple task trainers to do it, all the way up until you use the mannequins that sit up, talk, blink, breathe, have pulses.
Oh,
so that would
okay.
be the more high fidelity, or think high fidelity, like the more bells and whistles, and low fidelity is that there's not a whole lot of technology. It could just be people sitting in a room debriefing, and acting, having standardized patients act in, an environment like an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, as a part of a student learning. That can be a simulation. It's a simulated environment. So if you're simulating in a community setting in an AA meeting, that can be simulation, because you're doing it in a safe space with actors in the sim lab to help students glean the skills that they need to do that in real life, or to complement the learning that they're doing off campus with real patients. Same can be said for the high fidelity mannequins. You can you can have somebody, code or, lose their blood pressure and their pulse, and then practice resuscitating them with the mannequin. And there's skills that are gleaned from that are translatable or transferable over to when that happens, in your clinical practice at the bedside with the patient. So
Okay.
simulation is meant to be a place where you practice skills. It's meant to be a place where you go through scenarios, and all in a safe environment that you're prepared for that experience by the faculty. With at Cabrini, we give pre-assignments, or we'll give pre-assignments, then a pre-brief, then they go in and do the actual simulated experience, whatever that may look like, high fidelity or low fidelity. And then there's a debrief with the faculty about what everybody did really well, and how did we get such great outcomes with this simulation, versus, okay, what were the mistakes or the things that we could have done differently, and how could our outcomes have been better if we would have, checked our medication and made sure we were giving 2 milligrams instead of 20, things like there's opportunity
Okay.
to go back and debrief and learn and reflect. And then at Cabrini, they have assignments afterwards, and every school operationalizes their curriculum different. So you could talk to 50 directors and get 50 different answers to this. But the way that our students do it is then they also have an opportunity to reflect after the fact, and then either journal about it or submit an assignment. So it's a whole experience that starts before the time in the simulated experience and ends well beyond that time as well, in terms of reflection, because the idea is to to think about what you did and
Right.
to either, reinforce good behavior that has good outcomes or to, reflect upon behavior that may have led to less than desirable outcomes for the patient.
Okay. I
And we do
remember.
have just one, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to
Go ahead.
interrupt you.
Go ahead.
One other thing, virtual reality is something that we're using in our sim lab. And that's kind of a new thing on the horizon, that people are starting to utilize with simulation, because it's a good way to put students in an immersive environment, which, our traditional students, not necessarily our non-traditional students, but the ones that are coming out of high school of that age, they're used to the technology and they're used to being immersed in experiences. So
True,
virtual
true.
reality is a good way it's a good educational tool to teach them the skills, from basic skills to high level skills in an more technologically rich environment like they're used to.
So students at Cabrini are going to have 2 years of classroom, right? And then do they go into the lab setting, or do they go into hospital settings? How's your program designed?
Well, it's a 4-year program, and basically the first 2 years are the core curriculum. So every college or university has a core curriculum that all students within the university take. So that's typically, it could be spread out over however many years. At Cabrini, it's over 2 years. And then the last 2 years is all nursing all the time. And then they do take nursing courses at Cabrini in their freshman and sophomore year. They're very low credit courses. They're just meant to build the community, because we accept students right into the nursing major. So they're immediately accepted into our community. They know the faculty. They know their upperclassmen. Of course, right now they have one upperclassman class,
Right,
but eventually
right.
there'll be more for mentoring. But there's that opportunity to indoctrinate them into the profession, teach them accountability, professionalism, talk about hot topics. I mean, there was no lack of trends and issues to talk about last year with everything that was happening in our society and politically and with COVID. So that's the way that it's integrated at Cabrini. But one of the things that I love about our program is we do have this beautiful lab that we were able to, build and equip during COVID, and it's really, really state of the art. But what I'm really proud of in that is that even though the students in freshman and sophomore year don't utilize the lab for evaluative purposes, like they're not doing formal learning in there that's, scripted, and they're not being evaluated or graded on it, we are able to get our freshmen and sophomore students into the lab. So we just did, this past week, we did like a safety lab where, students walked in and there was all kinds of things going wrong with their mannequin and the IV pumps beeping and this and that. So we did all kinds of activities with them to get them throughout the freshman and sophomore year that don't count for anything. And frankly, they don't even have to show up. Like, they don't get course credit. It's not required. They just come because they want to, because it's fun for them to be able, and engaging for them to be able to touch the equipment before they're being graded on it. So they come and they do things and learn how to use the beds and learn just the fundamental aspects that once you're at the bedside and you're worried about taking somebody's blood pressure, you don't want to also have to figure out how to use the bed, you want to come in with a strong bed use skill.
Right.
So, yeah.
Oh, I was in a hospital a couple of weeks ago, and there were students there, and the student came in to take a blood pressure, and she used the automatic blood pressure, the Dynamap, and the blood pressure was really low, and she didn't say anything to the patient, and I said, you might want to use a different cuff. And she just looked at me. And I said, you're a nursing student, right? She said, yeah. And I said, okay, well, maybe come back and take it again, right? Like manually as opposed to automatically. She never came back. So I talked with her nursing instructor, and I asked, I said, do nursing students learn how to take blood pressures manually? Because, I'm a little bit surprised that she didn't come back with the low blood pressure. And she said, well, they do take them if they're abnormal, if it's abnormally high or abnormally low, they'll retake it with manually. I said, well, you might want to remind the student to do that. So I was disappointed to see that. Okay. So just telling you a little FYI. All right. So
noted.
Listen, I know, don't, it wasn't one of your students. Don't worry.
I know my student. No, but it's
I would tell you.
Yeah, I know you would, Betty.
All right, Jen. So we could talk. I know we've had more candid and lively conversations, but I want to be mindful of our time. Let me ask you this final question: If someone came to you and said they wanted to be a nurse, how would you respond?
I would say, good for you. That's amazing. Thank you for, answering your call, and what a rock star you are for thinking about this. Let's talk about what it is that you want to do, because a lot of times in my experience, when people say, especially now post-COVID, I want to be a nurse, what they really mean is they want to help somebody. They want to help people. They want to make a difference. They want to be part of the healthcare team. So my first question is always, tell me about what it is that you want to do. And some of them are very clear. I want to be a nurse practitioner. I want to be a pediatric nurse. I want to be an open heart nurse, whatever. And then we talk through what that might look like and all the different options. But sometimes I've noticed, and I'm assuming that this is more COVID related than anything else, because we're, the big national spotlight's been on nurses for, the last year and a half. God, we're getting close to 2 years now. But I always try to break down with them, what is it that you want to do? Because sometimes they're thinking like they'd be better served to be a respiratory therapist or a physical therapist or an occupational therapist or a doctor, a PA. Not every, you have to kind of dive into, tell me what it is that what you want to do. And certainly I steer them towards nursing, but not if that's not what they want to do, not if that's not their passion. Because the BSN is the hardest degree to get, undergraduate degree to get. It's rigorous. So you have to be in it. Your heart has to be in it. You have to not only have the academic strengths to do it, but you have to have the passion or some sort of motivation. So I always try to talk that through. What is it that, basically the first question you asked me, what is it that made you want to be a nurse? There was nobody that was going to tell me I wasn't being a nurse after what happened to my dad. Do you know what I mean? And I had the academic ability to do it. But I would counsel people to find out, what is it that you really want to do? And if it's nursing, cool. Let's talk. Let's talk about the millions of things you want to do. Do you want to work internationally? Do you want to work in business? Like, what is it that you want to do as a nurse? Do you want to work at the bedside? Do you want to deliver baby? Do you want to be a midwife? Like, talk to me about what it is that your goals are, and then let's kind of break it down to what makes sense for you here and now in terms of your education, because this is just the start. When you enter into a nursing program these days, I feel like you should enter in knowing this is the first of many programs that you're going to go through, educational programs, whether they're, degree granting programs or certification programs. The life of a nurse is education, 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 whether it's hospital-based, community-based, academic-based, doesn't matter. Right.
Wow, that was a great answer. I feel inspired. I may want to become a nurse. Oh, wait, I am a nurse. Oh, shucks. I can't do it all over again. I would, though, if I talked to you.
You know what? Thank you for that. But I think, your place in our nursing world is essential and certainly shines light in all the right places for people to understand, what patient advocacy is. And we just had an open house on Sunday for Cabrini Nursing, very well attended, was very happy. People asked lots of questions. And one of the things they asked was, who are your clinical partners beyond the acute care? Because I always emphasize acute care is super important, hospital is super important, but let's be realistic. Care is happening and is going to happen pre and post hospitalization in the community, in our, in population specific communities. So we really have to start thinking about that. So that one person put up their hand and asked, what is it? The non-acute care, essentially, partners. And I mentioned guardian nurses, and I mentioned what it is that you do, and, that you dispatch nurses to advocate and, basically be care navigators. And I enjoy sharing a little bit of your story and what it is that you do, because I think it's such an important part of what nursing education is and nursing as a whole as a profession. So thank you for what you do too, Betty.
Oh, well, my pleasure. Thank you. I appreciate that, Jen. So thank you for your words of wisdom, and your really, I learned something as well, which is a credit to you as an educator. So thank you.
Thank you.
A very happy Thanksgiving to you and your family. And thanks for your time.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Betty. Happy Thanksgiving, happy and safe holidays to everyone.
Okay. Take care, Jen.
All right. Thanks, Betty.
Bye.
Bye.
If you have any questions that you would like us to address in a future episode, please email us at podcast@guardiannurses.org. guardiannurses.com. That email again is podcast@guardiannurses.com. We would love to hear from you. Thank you for joining us this week. You can find the Lighting Your Way podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google, YouTube, Spotify, and Stitcher. If you liked what you heard, tell a friend and leave us a review. You can learn all about Guardian Nurses Healthcare Advocates on our website, guardiannurses.com. So until next time, find some joy in your life, pet all the good doggies and kitties, and remember to tell your people that you love them. Take care.